The first man who ever taught me how to stand up straight was my father. The last time he needed somebody to stand up for him, I almost let the wrong person teach me how small a man can become when he keeps calling surrender peace. My father, Earl Bennett, was 86 years old and still folded his napkin after every meal, like the Queen of England might stop by and inspect it. He had been a mail carrier in Cedar Falls, Iowa, for 31 years, back when a man knew every dog on his route by name and every widow by the sound of her screen door. He delivered birthday cards, pension checks, medicine, Christmas packages, and once, during the blizzard of '79, he carried groceries 3 blocks in a canvas mail sack because Mrs. Donnelly's son couldn't get his truck started. That was my father. He didn't talk much about love. Men of his generation didn't put feelings on display unless somebody was being born, buried, or shipped overseas. But he lived love the way other men lived. Religion, quiet, daily, without applause. When my mother died 17 years ago, Dad put on his only black suit, stood beside her casket, shook every hand that came through that church basement, and then went home and washed the casserole dishes because he said people shouldn't have to come back for their pans. He never remarried, never even hinted at it. I had the best, he told me once, sitting in his garage with the radio low and a cup of coffee going cold between his hands. A man doesn't keep shopping after he's already been blessed. I am 64 years old, family, and I thought by that age a man knew what loyalty looked like. I thought I knew who would show up when the chair was empty, when the phone rang wrong, when the nurse said, "Someone needs to come now." I was wrong about one person, and that one mistake cost me 12 years. My name is Martin Bennett. Most people call me Marty. I taught shop class at Roosevelt High for 28 years before my knees and the school board both decided I had done enough. I fixed lawn mowers for neighbors, coached Little League when my son was young, and spent my retirement keeping everybody's engines running except my own marriage. My wife's name was Marlene. Notice I said was. She was beautiful in the polished way a locked glass cabinet is beautiful. Everything in place, nothing warm behind it. She had a talent for making selfishness sound like scheduling. If she didn't want to visit my father, she had commitments. If she didn't want him over for Sunday dinner, she was protecting our boundaries. If she rolled her eyes when Dad called during a movie, she was tired of your family, always assuming you're available. I told myself she didn't mean it. That is one of the most dangerous sentences a lonely husband can whisper to himself. It was a Thursday morning in late October when the call came. I remember the exact date because the maple tree outside our kitchen had turned the color of rusted copper, and I remember the time because I had just put 2 pieces of rye bread in the toaster when my phone rang at 9:18. It was Mercy Ridge Rehabilitation Center. Dad had spent 12 days there after a fall in his kitchen. Nothing broken, thank God, but bruised ribs, a sprained wrist, and a stubborn old man's pride cracked clean down the middle. He hated being there. Said the pudding tasted like wet chalk, and the television only had 3 channels worth watching, all of them showing people younger than him giving advice to people older than him. I answered on the second ring. "Mr. Bennett?" a woman asked. "This is Carla from Mercy Ridge. Your father is medically cleared for discharge this morning. We need a family member here by 11:30. I looked at the toaster like it had personally betrayed me. "Today?" "Yes, sir. His doctor signed the order. We tried arranging transport, but the local service is backed up until tomorrow afternoon, and Mr. Bennett is refusing to stay another night." That sounded like him. "Is he okay?" "He's stable. He'll need help getting settled, and there are prescriptions to pick up before he goes home. He's moving slow, but he is very alert." In the background, I heard a familiar voice say, "Tell my son I'm not a sofa. I don't need to be scheduled for delivery." Carla sighed, but I could hear her smiling. I grabbed my jacket off the chair. "Tell him I'm on my way." Then I remembered. My truck was at Dawson's garage with the transmission dropped out of it. Jimmy Dawson had called the day before and said, "Marty, I've seen healthier soup than what came out of this thing. It wouldn't be ready until Monday at the earliest." Marlene's white Cadillac XT5 sat in the driveway, washed, waxed, and pointed toward the street like it was too important to face the garage. She was upstairs in the guest room she had turned into her wellness space. doing stretches in front of a woman on YouTube who spoke like she had never been disappointed in her life. I went to the bottom of the stairs. Marlene. No answer. Marlene, I need the Cadillac. The video paused. Floorboards creaked. A few seconds later, she appeared at the top of the stairs in expensive leggings and a gray sweater tied perfectly around her waist, like she was modeling a life neither one of us actually had. For what? Not what happened? Not, is Earl okay? Just for what, like I had asked to borrow her pearl earrings. Mercy Ridge called. Dad's being discharged this morning. I need to pick him up and get his prescriptions. She stared at me. I have the women's club luncheon at noon. Marlene, he's 86 years old. He's being discharged from rehab after a fall. I understand that. She did not understand anything. I could see it in her face. She was already measuring inconvenience, not need. I'll have it back by 2, I said. No, Marty, I'm not doing this today. I waited, because sometimes the first ugly thing a person says is just the doorway to a better thought. No better thought came. What do you mean you're not doing this? She came down 3 steps, slow and controlled. Your father does this all the time. He creates emergencies because he knows you'll jump. He fell in his kitchen. He didn't create anything. He could stay another night. The nurse said he's cleared. He wants to go home. Then let the facility handle him. I looked at her for a long second. There are moments in a marriage when a room changes temperature. Nothing moves. No glass breaks. No door slams. But something invisible leaves and never comes back. Marlene, I said, keeping my voice low. My father is sitting in a rehab center waiting for his son. She crossed her arms. And my life does not stop every time Earl snaps his fingers. He is not snapping his fingers. He's your father, Marty. Not mine. Her mouth barely moved when she said the next words. He can wait. I stood there with my hand on the banister. He can wait. An 86-year-old man who had walked through snow with medicine in his mailbag. A man who had paid for my first set of tools with overtime. A man who had sat beside my mother through 16 rounds of chemo and never once complained about a chair, a bill, a doctor, or the smell of hospital soap. He can wait. I nodded once. Not because I agreed. Because I understood. All right, I said. She looked relieved, which made it worse. She thought she had won. I took out my phone and called Calvin Brooks. Calvin was 72, a retired school bus driver, deacon at First Methodist, and one of the few men I knew who would answer a call before asking whether it was convenient. He lived 2 streets over in a brick ranch house with a flagpole out front and a wife named Annie who made peach cobbler that could heal a family argument. He picked up on the first ring. Marty, you breathing? I need a hand. Dad's being discharged from Mercy Ridge. My truck's in the shop, and Marlene's car is unavailable. Can you help me get him? I heard keys jingle. I'm putting my shoes on. That's all you need to know? That's all there is. Be outside in 5. He was there in 4 minutes and 20 seconds, driving an old blue Buick with a dented fender and more grace in it than Marlene's Cadillac ever had. On the way to Mercy Ridge, Calvin didn't ask why Marlene wasn't with me. That was one of his gifts. He knew when a man needed silence more than advice. Dad was waiting by the nurse's station when we arrived, wearing his brown wool coat and a cap that said U.S. Male Retired. His left wrist was in a brace. His ribs made him move carefully, and he had a paper bag of belongings tucked under one arm like he had checked out of a motel instead of a medical facility. You're late, he said. We're 11 minutes early. I like to leave before people start missing me. Carla handed me discharge papers and gave me instructions about pain medication, blood pressure, pills, follow-up appointments, fall prevention, diet, hydration, and about 6 other things Dad pretended not to hear. Mr. Bennett, she said to him, you need to use the walker for at least a week. Dad looked at the walker like it had insulted his mother. I'll negotiate with it. You'll use it, I said. He glanced at me. Your mother had your tone when she wanted the gutters cleaned. She was right, too. That almost got a smile out of him. Calvin pulled the Buick up to the front entrance. Dad got in slowly, refusing help until the exact second he needed it, then accepting my hand without looking at me. That was his way of keeping dignity intact. As we drove to Johnson's pharmacy, Dad looked out the window at the trees and said, Where's Marlene? I watched the back of Calvin's head. He kept his eyes on the road. She had a luncheon. Dad nodded once. That so? Yes, sir. What kind of luncheon? Women's club. Another nod. Important sandwiches, then. I almost laughed, but something in my chest was too tight. At the pharmacy, Calvin waited in the car with Dad while I went inside. The prescriptions weren't ready. Of course they weren't. Nothing involving medicine, insurance, and a printer ever moves like a human being needs it to. I stood there under fluorescent lights while a young pharmacist with tired eyes typed and retyped Dad's information. My phone buzzed. Marlene. I let it ring. Then it buzzed again. A text appeared. Are you bringing my car back? I stared at that sentence until the words lost shape. She didn't know I hadn't taken her car. She didn't ask whether Dad was all right. She didn't ask whether he got discharged safely. She didn't even ask if I needed help. Are you bringing my car back? I turned the phone face down on the counter. When I got back to the Buick, Dad was telling Calvin about the time a German shepherd named Moses chased him through 3 yards on Maple Street, and then sat down politely once Dad gave him a fig Newton. Calvin was laughing so hard the Buick shook. I climbed in, handed Dad the prescription bag, and he looked at me just a little too long. She texted, he said. It wasn't a question. My father could read bad news in the way a man shut a car door. Nothing important. He looked down at the orange pill bottles in his lap. That's usually what people say about the things that hurt them most. I didn't answer. We got him home to his little yellow house on Birch Avenue just after 1. I made soup from a can because Dad claimed homemade soup made him feel observed. I checked the rugs, moved the coffee table 6 inches so the walker could pass, set his medications in a plastic organizer, and put Carla's instructions on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a trout. Dad sat at the kitchen table, one hand wrapped around a mug of tea, watching me move around the kitchen he had lived in for 43 years. Marty. Yes, sir? Sit down. I sat. He waited until I looked at him. Your wife refused. I opened my mouth. He raised one finger. Don't polish it. I'm too old for varnish. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. That clock had been there since 1988. My mother bought it at Sears and said every kitchen needed something honest. She had plans, I said. Dad's face did not change. Son, everybody has plans. Character is what you do when somebody else's need interrupts them. There it was. A sentence so simple it didn't need to raise its voice. She said you could wait. I hated how small my voice sounded. Dad looked toward the back window, where my mother's rose bushes had gone brown for the season. I've waited before, he said. Waited in hospital rooms. Waited for test results. Waited for your mother to stop hurting. Waiting isn't the hard part. He looked back at me. The hard part is learning who left you there. I felt something in me shift, not explode, not break, shift, like a picture on a wall finally hanging level after years of being crooked. I'm not angry, I said. Dad tilted his head. No, he said. You're tired. That was worse, because it was true. At 4:30, after Dad had taken his pills and fallen asleep in his recliner with a baseball game murmuring on the television, I stepped onto the back porch and called Marlene. She answered like she had been waiting to be inconvenienced. Where are you? At Dad's. Still? Yes. You could have told me you weren't taking my car. I did not have time to keep you updated while I was getting my father out of rehab. A pause. Marty, don't take that tone with me. I looked at the empty bird feeder hanging from the porch beam. Dad used to fill it every morning. He couldn't reach it now. Marlene, I'm not taking a tone. I'm taking care of my father. And I'm supposed to feel guilty because I had obligations? No, I said. You're supposed to feel whatever you're capable of feeling. Silence. Then she laughed once, sharp and humorless. You're being dramatic. Maybe I was. Maybe every man finally telling the truth sounds dramatic to someone who benefited from his silence. I'll be home later, I said. Good. We need to talk about the lake property. The realtor called this morning. He says your father still hasn't signed the final listing paperwork, and if we don't move before winter, we'll lose the developer. There it was. Not Dad, not his ribs, not his wrist, not the walker by the kitchen door. The lake property. My father owned 12 acres on Lake Rathbun, with a small cabin he built himself in 1976 and a boathouse that leaned a little more every year but somehow never fell. Marlene had been obsessed with selling it for the past 18 months. A developer from Des Moines wanted the land for vacation rentals. Dad had considered it because upkeep was getting hard, and because Marlene had convinced him the money could help Marty finally retire properly. Properly, in Marlene's vocabulary, meant the two of us, in a condo in Sarasota, with white furniture nobody could sit on, and neighbors she could impress. Dad had never promised her a dime, but he had listened. He had allowed the realtor to draw up paperwork. He had even put Marlene down as the contact person because she said she was better with details. I had let that happen. That is the part I still regret. "Marty," she said. "Did you hear me?" "Yes. Talk to Earl tonight. We need him to stop dragging his feet." I looked through the kitchen window at my father asleep under the old brown blanket my mother crocheted. His mouth was slightly open. His bruised hand rested on the arm of the chair. He looked smaller than the man who had taught me to hold a hammer and throw a curveball and shake hands like I meant it. "No," I said. "No what?" "No, I'm not talking to him about selling anything tonight. Marty, don't be ridiculous. That property is just sitting there." So was my father at Mercy Ridge. She said my name in that warning voice she used when company was around, and I had said something too honest. I ended the call. That night, I slept on Dad's couch. Not because he needed me every minute. He didn't. He woke once at 2:15 to use the bathroom, cursed the walker under his breath, and told me to stop hovering because I looked like a nervous waiter. I stayed, because going home felt like walking back into a room where something had died and everyone was pretending not to smell it. The next morning, Dad was up before me. I found him at the kitchen table in his robe, reading the Cedar Falls Gazette with a magnifying glass and making notes in the margin like the newspaper was going to improve if he coached it hard enough. "You look terrible," he said. "Good morning to you too." Coffee's in the pot. It's strong enough to remove paint." "Perfect." I poured a cup and sat across from him. He folded the newspaper slowly. "I need you to call Nora Whitcomb." Nora Whitcomb was Dad's attorney. She had handled my mother's estate and the deed after Dad paid off the house. 60-something, silver hair, sharp eyes, voice like a judge who had already read the evidence. "For what?" "The lake property." "And my trust." My stomach tightened. "Dad, you don't need to make decisions right now." He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "Marty, I delivered mail through 2 wars, 3 recessions, and 1 mayor who thought biting dogs were a personal freedom. I know when I'm thinking clearly. I just don't want you doing something because of Marlene. I'm not doing it because of Marlene." He tapped the folded newspaper once. "I'm doing it because of me." I didn't speak. He reached for the yellow legal pad beside him. My father had made notes. Of course he had. Earl Bennett did not make emotional decisions. He made lists, checked tire pressure, sharpened pencils with a pocket knife, and thought through consequences before breakfast. "I was going to sell that place because I thought it would make things easier for you," he said. "I thought maybe if your wife had what she wanted, she might stop making you apologize for loving your own father." The sentence hit so hard I looked away. "Son." I looked back. "She won't." I could hear the old clock ticking. I could hear the furnace click on. I could hear my own breathing, uneven and embarrassed. Dad slid the legal pad toward me. "I want the listing canceled. The cabin goes into a family trust. You can use it as long as you're alive. After you, it goes to your boy and his children if he has any. The back 4 acres by the creek I want donated to the county for that veterans fishing program Calvin told me about. Men come home with too much noise in their heads. A quiet bank and a pole might help. Dad. And I'm taking Marlene off as contact for everything. Medical, property, bank, all of it." I rubbed my forehead. "She's going to be furious." Dad leaned back carefully, protecting his ribs. "I imagine so. You're not worried?" "No." "Why?" "Because anger from the wrong person is often proof you finally did the right thing." I called Nora at 8-6. She answered herself. "Earl Bennett," she said when Dad took the phone. I heard you tried to fight a kitchen floor and lost. Temporary setback, Dad said. The floor had home advantage. She laughed. Then he told her what he wanted. No dramatics. No revenge speech. No thunder. Just an old man at his kitchen table, correcting the map of his own life. Nora arrived at 1:30 with a leather briefcase, 2 folders, and the kind of calm that makes foolish people nervous. Calvin came by too, not as a witness to anything legal, just to sit on the porch in case Dad needed something and I needed somebody steady nearby. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. I stayed in the living room unless Dad called me in. Some things were his business, not mine, but I heard enough. The listing would be canceled by Dad directly with the realtor. The trust would be revised. The medical power documents would name me first and Calvin as backup. The lake cabin would stay in the family, protected. The creek acreage would go to the veterans program after survey. Marlene's name would appear nowhere, not because she had been written out of something she owned, but because Dad had finally stopped letting her stand near things she had not earned. At 3:40, Nora packed up her folders. At the door, she looked back at my father, who was arguing with the walker again. "Your dad knows exactly what he's doing," she said quietly. "I know." "No," she said. "I mean that. Some people make changes out of anger. He made his out of clarity." That word stayed with me. Clarity. After she left, Dad called Sam Bell, the realtor. He put the phone on speaker because his wrist hurt and because, I think, he wanted me to hear him say it. "Sam, this is Earl Bennett. I'm canceling the Lake Rathbun listing." Sam sputtered. "Mr. Bennett, are you sure? The developer's offer?" "I'm sure. Your daughter-in-law has been coordinating. She will not be coordinating anything of mine anymore." A quiet pause. "Yes, sir. I'll send written confirmation through my attorney." "Yes, sir. I understand." Dad ended the call and placed the phone on the table like a man setting down a brick exactly where it belonged. "That'll stir the bees," Calvin said from the doorway. Dad nodded. "Then they should have stayed out of my tree." My phone started buzzing at 4:12. Marlene. I watched her name light up the screen. Then again, at 4:13. Then 4:14. Then 4:15. Dad looked at the phone, then at me. "She knows," he said. "Sam probably called her." "Good. Saves postage." By 5, she had called 19 times and left 6 voicemails. I listened to none of them. Dad ate half a bowl of chicken stew Annie Brooks had brought over, complained it needed pepper, then ate the other half. Calvin drove home before dark. I settled Dad in his recliner, put a bottle of water within reach, and checked the locks. "You going home?" Dad asked. I looked at my phone. 28 missed calls. "I suppose I should." He studied me. "Marty, listen to me." I stood still. "A wife who loves you doesn't have to love everything you love the same way you do. But she cannot despise what made you who you are, and still claim to cherish the man standing in front of her." My throat tightened. "I should have seen it sooner." He shook his head. "Most men see it late. The lucky ones still have time to walk out the door." I drove Calvin's borrowed Buick back to my house just after 7 because my truck was still at Dawson's and Calvin insisted I keep the car overnight. "Annie says if you argue, I'm supposed to call you hard-headed and hang up," he told me, so I did not argue. Marlene was waiting in the living room. Not sitting, waiting. There is a difference. She had changed clothes. Her makeup was redone. That told me she had expected a fight and wanted to look controlled for it. "Do you have any idea what your father did today?" I closed the door behind me. "Yes." Her face changed. "You knew?" "I was there for part of it." "You let him cancel the listing?" "It's his land." "It was our retirement." "No," I said, hanging Calvin's keys on the hook by the door. "It was my father's cab." She laughed, but it came out wrong. "You're really going to stand there and pretend we weren't counting on that money?" I wasn't. "That is not fair." I looked at her, really looked at her. 12 years of marriage stood between us like a table full of unpaid bills. All the little comments, all the eye rolls, all the holidays she made difficult, all the Sunday dinners she skipped, all the times Dad had asked if Marlene was coming, and I had lied with gentle words because I was ashamed of the truth. "Fair?" I said. Her eyes narrowed. Yesterday morning, my father was sitting in a rehab center with bruised ribs and a sprained wrist, waiting for someone to bring him home. You told me he could wait. I had a commitment. You had salad. You don't get to belittle my life because your father refuses to plan ahead. He fell. He is always going to need something, Marty. Always. And you run every time. Yes, I said. I do. She blinked, surprised by the lack of apology. And I will keep running, because when I was a boy with a fever, he ran. When my mother was dying, he ran. When my son needed help after his divorce, he ran. That man has spent 86 years showing up for people who needed him. Marlene looked toward the window. This is emotional manipulation. No, I said. This is family. Her mouth tightened. Your father is turning you against me. I almost smiled. Not because anything was funny, but because the old version of me would have tried to soften that sentence. The old version would have said, no, no, it's not like that. The old version would have begged her to understand a thing she had spent years refusing to see. The old version was tired. No, Marlene. You did that yourself. Her phone was on the coffee table. Mine buzzed in my pocket again. I ignored it. She took a step closer. Call him. No. Tell him he overreacted. No. Marty, that property could change our lives. It already did. The room went quiet. She stared at me, and for the first time all day I saw something beyond anger. Fear. Not fear of losing me. Not yet. Fear of losing the future she had built in her mind with my father's land as the foundation. You're going to let him give part of it to strangers? She asked. To veterans. Strangers. My father was a Navy man. Some of those strangers may understand him better than you ever tried to. Her face flushed. That's cruel. So was he can wait. She looked away. There it was. Not guilt exactly. Recognition. A small, unwelcome flash of memory passing through her face. For 1 second, I thought she might say she was sorry. Instead, she said, I didn't think he would find out. That did it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I felt the last piece of my old marriage loosen its grip. You didn't think he would find out, I repeated. She pressed her lips together, realizing too late what she had admitted. You weren't sorry he was left waiting. You were sorry there were consequences. Marty. No. My voice did not rise. It didn't need to. No more explanations. No more making my father sound needy so you can feel reasonable. No more pretending I'm dramatic because I remember who loved me before you decided I was useful. She stood very still. My phone buzzed again. Then hers did. She looked down. The screen lit up with my father's name. EARL Bennett. For a moment, hope crossed her face. End quote. Maybe she thought he was calling to forgive her. Maybe she thought an old man's heart would be soft enough to bend around her greed. Maybe she thought, if she could just use the right voice, the right apology, the right little tremble, she could walk herself back into a future she had not earned. She picked up the phone, but she didn't answer yet. She looked at me. What should I say? I opened the front door. Cold October air entered the house, clean and sharp, smelling faintly of leaves and rain. Try the truth, I said. Then I stepped outside. Behind me, through the half-open door, I heard her answer in a voice smaller than I had ever heard it. Earl? I did not stay to listen. I walked down the porch steps and stood beside Calvin's Buick under the maple tree. My phone showed 36 missed calls. 36 little alarms from a life that only knew how to reach for me when something it wanted had been taken away. I got in the car, but I didn't start it right away. For 12 years, I had called myself a patient husband, a forgiving husband, a man who kept peace. But sitting there in the dark, with the leaves moving across the windshield and my father's words still warm in my chest, I finally understood something I wish I had understood sooner. Peace is not the absence of arguing. Sometimes, it is just the silence of one person disappearing slowly while the other gets comfortable. I had not been protecting my marriage. I had been protecting Marlene from the consequences of who she was. That night, I drove back to my father's house. He was in his recliner when I arrived, television low, walker beside him, my mother's blanket over his knees. He looked up when I came in. Well? He asked. She answered your call. She did. What did you say? He shrugged carefully. I told her I was grateful. I stared at him. Grateful? Yes. For what? For making herself plain. I sat down across from him. Dad looked at the television, then muted it. I also told her not to contact Sam Bell, Nora Whitcomb, or anybody connected to my affairs again. Then I told her she owed you an apology, but that I doubted she understood the kind that costs something. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. She didn't like that. No, Dad said. She did not. We sat there a while without talking. The kind of silence men like us understand. Not empty, full, a quiet place to put things too heavy to carry standing up. After a few minutes, Dad said, You staying? Yes. How long? I looked toward the hallway, toward the room where my mother's old sewing machine still sat under a sheet, toward the kitchen, where the clock kept telling the truth. Tonight, I said. Then I thought about Marlene in that living room, about the way she had asked what to say, not what to feel. I thought about my father, waiting at Mercy Ridge. I thought about all the times I had excused being alone because admitting it felt worse. And probably tomorrow. Dad nodded. That'll do for a start. I slept in my old room that night. The wallpaper still had a faint pattern of blue stripes my mother picked when I was 15. My baseball glove sat on the top shelf of the closet, stiff and dusty, holding its shape after all those years. I lay there in the dark, 64 years old, back under my father's roof, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel foolish. I felt free. The next morning, I called Jimmy Dawson and told him to take his time with my truck. Then I called a lawyer of my own. Not because I hated Marlene. Hate is too much work for a man my age. I called because my father was right. The lucky ones still have time to walk out the door. And when a man finally sees the difference between being loved and being used, he owes it to every person who ever showed up for him to stop standing where he is not cherished. Dad came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. He moved slow, one hand on the walker, chin lifted like the walker was an assistant he had reluctantly hired. You burn it? He asked. Not yet. Good. Your mother burned coffee once in 1994 and blamed the pot until the day she died. I laughed. He sat down at the table, winced a little, and looked out at the morning light on the empty bird feeder. I'll fill that for you, I said. I know. I'll get groceries too. I know. And I'll take you to your follow-up on Monday. He looked at me then, eyes clear and steady beneath those heavy white brows. I know, son. 2 words. That was all. But in those 2 words was every lunchbox he packed after Mom got sick, every ball game he came to tired, every driveway he shoveled, every hard lesson, every quiet sacrifice, every time he had been there before I even knew I needed him. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. He looked down at it, then back at me. Don't get sentimental on me before breakfast, he said. Yes, sir. But he did not pull his hand away. And outside that little yellow house on Birch Avenue, the October wind moved through the trees, stripping away what was dead, making room for what could still stand. The people who truly love us may not always say much, but they show up when life gets heavy. And when kindness has carried us for years, the best thanks we can give is to protect it, return it, and stop making excuses for anyone who treats it lightly. Choose the hands that steady you, and become that steady hand for someone else.